to DPH databases. So we could look at pollutants to give us an idea of what they're being discharged. But keep in mind, we have the exception that allows them to discharge at higher levels for the priority pollutants.
Oh, yeah, and very good. So, yeah, we'll look at that, certainly, the comments we receive and ideas about the information people are spending money and generating now and how that would be that addresses things we're looking for.
Good, thank
Oh,
you.
right, and you're focusing on the pollutants that have an imminent risk to critters, if they're close, and all the other limitations you put on it.
Correct.
Right. Right. All right. Lori Schechtel from, thank you, from SFPUC, and followed by Chandra Johansson from East Bay Mud.
Yes, hi. For the record, I'm Lori Schechtel with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission.
Bringing to your mic. Right.
Yes, you have to behave or they
Sorry.
slap one of these things on you and you just feel awful about it.
Lori Schechtel with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. And we're probably going to make just one comment today. We'll be commenting on sort of many aspects of the written permit, and I've talked with Diana after some of the workshops. So I think she understands what our concerns are. The PUC supports the statewide permit process, but currently we'd argue that there's a fundamental flaw with the permit the way it's currently drafted, and that flaw would be the coverage of raw water. This is untreated surface waters. In particular for the PUC, that's an issue. The focus we feel for the board and in this permit should be on treated drinking water discharges. That's discharges of water that's been altered by some type of chemical addition or some introduction of pollutants, not unaltered raw water. We find that this is a problem because covering raw water under the NPDES program we feel is completely misplaced and misguided. In our written comments, we're going to attempt to streamline the definitions of what's covered so that they're more easily understood and so that what's covered comports with what's inherent in the NPDES program itself. So we just wanted to bring this issue, to your attention, that we have a concern about unaltered raw water.
Can you just help? I think I understand what the issue is. I mean, part of what we talked about with raw water was the groundwater issue where you're bringing up all kinds of TDS and other things that you're then potentially dropping into surface water that has living things in it that are harmed by that.
Right, but under this permit, currently, raw water is defined not only as groundwater
Right.
that might be untreated or partially treated, which partially treated is really just treated,
Yeah.
but untreated raw surface water is included. And that's never, I don't think, has been done before in NPDES format. So,
And the concern
thrust
would
should
be that
be
it's going to
there's no-
cover,
the
what?
concern would be that there's no pollutant introduced, there's no chemical added. So how do you regulate that under NPDES?
So,
Oh, you're being admonished to talk closer to your microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Just move, you can move it closer
Sorry.
to you.
so
I'm not
See,
using
I
the
told
mic.
you, he's watching because he's thinking
Right,
about those
right.
people who are listening over the web.
Right.
Yeah,
this-
right, when he shows
Yeah,
up, that's, you
and I
gotta be
should
nervous
probably
about.
make a quick distinction, that this is, what's covered in there especially is both planned discharges, but also emergency discharges from things like raw water lines.
Right.
So that is also covered. Inherently, there's no pollution in these lines and so forth.
you're just failing all
I am?
over the place.
I'm just not good with the mic.
You know what, we'll
I'm
listen to
trying.
you anyway.
I'm trying.
I'm very sensitive to this.
Yeah, and so I'm distinguishing this from what would be covered under the federal water transfer rule, which, basically, under that rule, discharges or transfers from one water body of the U.S. to another without any intervening process or treatment
Yeah.
or so forth would not be covered under NPDES. And we understand that, but the way the permit's written, what they do cover is raw, untreated surface water.
Right.
And if there's no pollutant at the point source, I don't understand, or we don't understand how that could be regulated under this permit
Do
or
you mean
covered.
legally? I'm trying to figure out what you're worried about having to do, which maybe.
We think it's definitely a stretch under NPDES.
I know, and we'll figure out the law. Lawyers will figure it out. I'm
Right,
trying
right.
to
We
figure
shouldn't
out.
have to.
Wait,
We
wait,
shouldn't
let
have.
me
Sorry,
finish.
sorry.
I'm really just trying, I used to run a public works department. I'm trying to figure out what you're worried about in terms of what you actually have to do.
Because then we have to monitor. We have to employ BMPs and do all sorts of things for water that doesn't contain any, chemicals or any, hasn't been altered in any way.
All right.
And currently, the SFPUC, we have a individual transmission system permit that we've had for the last 5 years that we're currently under. And they specifically call out unaltered raw water discharges as not being covered under that permit. And we would like the same consideration in this permit as well. So.
All right, I mean, we'll read your comments too. Was there something you wanted to clarify? I could just envision where the erosion issue could be a problem in some places, but I'm just trying to figure out the practical
Right.
issue.
So, I mean, there is an issue, and it's going to be very case-specific because the water transfer rule is, somewhat in flux in terms of EPA's regulations. And so we did include in this last round in early July just a statement that coverage is not needed if the discharge is exempt from coverage under the Clean Water Act. We didn't try to spell out exactly when that would be the case. That would include things like discharges in the Lancaster-Palmdale area where there are no jurisdictional waters in the United States. It would potentially include things where there is water that's taken straight out of a surface water body and then put straight back into that surface water body without the addition of pollutants. Those things are not going to be covered under the scope of the Clean Water Act. So we did throw in, just a sentence to that effect to try to deal with this issue, but it really is going to be, I think, applied on a case-by-case basis. We're happy to see if they have other suggestions about how to do it, but we weren't going to propose a whole blanket exception to try to cover those surface water discharges that don't add a pollutant, because, again, it's going to be, I think, fairly case-by-case.
Because there could be cases where if you're dealing with raw water, it is going to be a problem, because my eye's on the critter right now.
Right. So there are cases where, as a sort of just based on the circumstances, the water may be taken out of a surface water stream, conveyed through a pipeline for some short distance, and then there's a discharge back to that same surface water stream. In some of those cases, there may in fact be a pollutant that's added from the pipe just for that short transmission. In other cases, there probably would be situations where there is no pollutant that's added. And that's all we're really talking about, I think.
Yeah, and I've got some experience in terms of pipelines and that sort of thing, and so if raw water is setting in a pipeline for a long time, then you're having an addition of pollution through deoxygenation. So it's like an inverse. So you can definitely lay the whammy on the receiving water with raw water.
Well, we just, we think that the focus really should be on water that has been altered by chemical addition in terms of what receiving water impacts are likely to be. Our raw water discharges aren't killing fish out there, and that's basically our point, I think.
No, it's good. No, thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you. Thanks.
Chandra Johansson, East Bay Mud, followed by Toby Roy from the San Diego County Water Authority.
Hi there, good afternoon. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the draft permit for drinking water system discharges, and huge thanks to Diana too. She's worked closely to hear our concerns, and we really do greatly appreciate that. Again, my name is Chandra Johansson, and I'm the Manager of Environmental Compliance for the East Bay Municipal Utility District, also known as East Bay MUD, out of Oakland,
Sorry.
California.
I didn't spell it out. I always say East Bay.
That's okay. I'm just going to refer to us as East Bay MUD. That's easier.
I'm your customer.
Oh, fantastic. It's good stuff.
Tastes great.
It does, indeed. So East Bay MUD, I want to note, does support the development of a permit that's going to provide regulatory clarity and coverage for these de minimis drinking water discharges. And again, we do appreciate the outreach and collaboration to date by State Board staff to work on the details as the permit's being developed. As you know, East Bay MUD provides safe, high-quality drinking water for 1.3 million customers in Alameda and Contra Costa County. We also operate water treatment and supply distribution and transmission systems in Amador and Calaveras counties, our upcountry facilities. So our facilities are regulated by both the San Francisco and Central Valley regional boards. This tentative order is going to have a direct impact on our operations, and so it's very, very important to us that it can be implemented effectively and affordably. I want to start by saying that there are a lot of elements in the draft permit that we think are very well written, easily understood, and have value, so I want to share some of the things that we do like, because there are things in the permit that we think are well done. We do greatly appreciate the consistency across regions that the state permit will bring. This approach is efficient and it's going to support successful implementation of the requirements for organizations like East Bay Mud that span multiple regional boards, jurisdictions, and would otherwise face conflicting requirements. So we do appreciate that. Additionally, we think it's a great idea that the AWWA guidance manual has been referenced in the permit for the types of BMPs that we should be utilizing and what's recommended to mitigate these discharges. It is the industry standard, it's proven to be effective, and we know how to do it well, as is demonstrated in our day-to-day response. So we are appreciative of that. Lastly, we do support the concept of representative monitoring. It does make a lot of sense to avoid excessive, unnecessary monitoring when the source water is already highly monitored and we understand what's in that water in order to comply with safe drinking water regulations. Representative monitoring will not only reduce the burden on the regulated community by streamlining that monitoring, it'll also reduce the burden on board staff as they won't need to manage an overwhelming data set that may not be really providing much critical information at all. So thank you. We like those things. And while there are a lot of positive elements in the permit, there also are some elements that we think provide some limited value and or could be easily clarified to make the permit even more useful. So I just wanted to touch on a few of those things here. So these comments are respectfully submitted with the intent to help protect water quality in California and establish practically achievable and economically feasible management practices for all water utilities. So first on definitions, I know you touched on this a little bit in your presentation, but we do believe that the current definitions for the types of water covered by the permit could be simplified and should be simplified. They're a little bit confusing right now, and we've spent a lot of time trying to really understand what exactly each of these things means, these definitions. And similar to Lori's comment earlier, we would suggest that the permit should simply cover altered water that's intended for potable use. So that's to say water that has been changed in some way by adding a pollutant, i.e. chlorine for disinfection. And if water has not been altered, it does not need to be covered. So that's on the definition element. On monitoring, regarding required effluent monitoring, the tentative order, as it's currently written in the current draft, doesn't make any distinction between monitoring for planned and unplanned events. I know in the presentation just a bit ago it said that there is no monitoring for emergency discharges, but the language currently does say monitoring if feasible. So that's a pretty significant distinction and something that we wanted to call out. Unplanned discharges are far more difficult to control than planned discharges due to their unpredictable nature and location, and the response is uniquely different. During an unplanned emergency response, it's emergency response that's initiated, and implementing BMPs during those events is the most critical action that's taken by field staff. During emergency response incidents, staff is focused on stopping the leak as quickly as possible to reduce the discharge, protecting property, conserving water, protecting public health and the environment. So we believe that having the response for that monitoring is unnecessary for these emergency events, and it should really be BMP focused. Additionally, one more item related to monitoring. Currently, all direct discharges, this was already hit on once, regardless of size, are required to be monitored. We would suggest that a numeric de minimis volume threshold for planned direct discharges should be established. There are several direct discharges with no or low threat, and monitoring is overly burdensome, costly, and there wouldn't be any added benefit. So, I mean, just for illustrative purposes, you can picture a garden hose discharging a few gallons into receiving water, and what's the real, significant impact to beneficial uses in a scenario like that. So we think it makes a lot of sense to add a low volume threshold for direct discharges under which no monitoring would be required. One more item is related to water treatment plant coverage. That's not something that's been commented on yet, but East Bay Mud does support the incorporation of water treatment plant discharges into this permit. We do understand from board staff that at this time this coverage may not include all discharges from water treatment plants, just select discharges. And the lack of full coverage would put organizations in a position where they may have multiple NPDES permits on a single piece of infrastructure, which could lead to some confusion with conflicting requirements, different due dates, and that sort of thing. So unintentional non-compliance, because we're trying to juggle multiple permits and requirements for a single piece of, for a single asset.
Now would be, you've gone pretty long.
Oh, have I? Okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
stop there then. I'm just going to say
You're
that
on
East
a
Bay
roll,
Mud does
so I
support the
don't wanna
permit.
stop.
We really appreciate the opportunity to comment, and we're going to continue to work with Diana and her staff, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Nice job on the mic.
Nice job
Thank
on
you.
the mic, yeah.
I learned from Lori.
That's right. It's all teamwork. Okay, Toby Roy, hi. Good to see you again so soon.
Yeah.
And then Deborah Sedgwick from Del Paso Manor Water District afterward.
Good afternoon, Chair Marcus, members of the board. My name is Toby Roy. I'm with the San Diego County Water Authority. We are a wholesale water agency. We have 24 member agencies. So the Water Authority and all of our member agencies are very interested in this permit. We are going to provide a long list of comments, written comments, so I'm not going to go through that whole list for you. I do want to say we do appreciate all the workshops that went on. We support the permit and the intent of the permit and recognize the importance of implementing the BMPs that protect water quality. We do think in the way the permit is currently written, there is a gap between what the intent of the permit is, what the permit says, and then the ability to implement provisions in the permit. And so there's some revisions that are needed to close those gaps. And so we think that we'll see what the next draft says, but it may be necessary to have a second comment period depending on how close it comes to closing those gaps. I did want to address a couple of issues specifically. One is the TMDL issue. As a San Diego region, we have 3 TMDLs that are mentioned in the permit. And so, as Diana said, the intent is that they don't think that the discharges have an impact on compliant TMDL compliance, but the TMDL language itself that's included in the permit essentially establishes a prohibition on discharges. Because in the TMDL section, it states that there is a 0 waste load allocation for certain TMDLs. So particularly the bacteria TMDL and on one of the nitrogen TMDLs. And so for us, a 0 waste load allocation is a prohibition on discharge. And then we have one TMDL on metals in Choyas Creek, which could, if it initiates the toxics rule, that essentially prohibits our discharges because we'll never get down to those numbers. So I've talked to Diana, and we're going to send in some language that we hope will clarify that we don't have a discharge prohibition, and that if we comply with the BMPs and the permit, essentially we're not contributing to making non-compliance with that TMDL. So that's an important issue for us. The other issue I did want to mention was on the fees. We do think our member agencies are concerned about how high the fees could go, and that the low threat fee is probably appropriate since it's similar to other low threat discharges. And I think one concern is for the small systems, you're going to drop the fees. So where are you going to pick up the fees? Is that on the large systems to help regulate all these small systems? So we are interested in the small water system issue, and 15, if you put out this permit that you have as written, you're going to get no response. Below a certain, the large agencies, all of us have been participating in this, we're all going to send in our notice of intent. Below that, you may get no response or very little response. And so the small systems are not equipped to even understand the permit and send in a notice of intent. And so we do think that you should put a threshold. The 3,000 connections would probably be fine. And maybe at a later date, if you want to address those smaller systems, give them a 2-page permit and accompany it with training, work with the Rural Water Association, Rural Community Assistance Corporation, because they just need to be educated on how to implement the BMPs. So we would ask in this round to drop off those small water systems.
Great, thank you very much. All right. Deborah Sedgwick, Del Paso Manor Water District, followed by Greg Buncab from Alameda County Water District. Hello.
Hi. Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Deborah Sedgwick, and I'm the General Manager of Del Paso Manor Water District. We're a small groundwater system in Sacramento County. We have 1,800 connections. So we're not the small 15 connections, but we're obviously not the large systems. So this is kind of a little bit maybe unique. Here, a different perspective. I also serve as a board member for the California Rural Water Association, which educates and gives technical assistance to small rural communities in both drinking water and wastewater systems. So I'm going to kind of speak a little bit about that as well today. So we are going to comment on the permit. We feel that it's much more manageable than the regional permit that we had. So thank you, Diana, for you and your staff of everything that you've done to assist in this, making it more manageable. But I want to express our gratitude to the staff who is working on the statewide permit and finding a way to draft the permit to meet the MPDS permit requirements and the water purveyor discharges. My district finally feels like the water board and the staff understand the need for a unified statewide permit for drinking water purveyors. The water board staff, in my opinion, is making a great effort to reach out to water systems of all sizes to address their concerns in order to make the permit more manageable for both reporting and economics. And today I'm asking the water board to encourage your staff to continue to do that, because there are a lot of concerns out there, and I feel that some of the smaller systems just really don't know about the permit and what it's going to entail for them. We recognize that there is a balance to protect the environment and the activities required by water systems to protect public health. Examples of these are well flushing, distribution system flushing, and pump to waste and required sampling. All of these activities require discharge of potable water, which under the current permit caused undue hardship to utilities for the monitoring and reporting requirements. This new permit seems like it eases it up, at least for agencies of my size and the large agencies. The small agencies, I'm not sure if it will, and that's the big question, is 15 too small? So speaking on behalf of California Rural Water, I know that several small agencies have reached out for assistance in trying to understand how this permit is, and I have forwarded those comments on to Diana and her staff. So again, I really encourage the board to ask the staff to implement those comments and reach out to that.
Great. Do you have, and I don't want to put you on the spot,
That's okay.
but you know more about the small water systems than I do, for example. Even though I've met with a lot of people from small water systems, I haven't asked them these kinds of questions over the years. Do you have a sense of where something between 15 and 3,000, is there a natural kind of break in the scope or in the volume of water that might be released in these kinds of things?
I think you're going to probably look at the breakdown. Like I was looking at their grid of just the cost for the field monitoring equipment, And when you take that cost, $410 plus the chemicals involved in that, and you break it down to 15 connections, let's use an example of 15 connections, that's, breaking down, I did some quick math, and that's $27, plus you have the cost of the chemicals, you have the BMP implementation, then of course the permit. That gets pretty expensive. So where is that break-even point? I
Right.
think it kind of depends. I think it would also depend on where exactly is the utility, where is their discharge?
Right.
Are they even chlorinating? A lot of these small systems don't even chlorinate their water. So again, it goes back to some of the comments that you heard prior about raw water. Is that a real harm? And it goes back to the cost benefit. If you're protecting the environment and the aquatic life, but to what degree of expense on the public?
Right.
And that's what's hard for the public to understand as well.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Good question.
What was it? Division of Drinking Water has a definition of small systems, right? Isn't it less than 300 or how many?
No.
I do believe it's actually 15 community drinking water systems.
Oh, okay. I'm
Yeah.
mixing it up with something
15
else.
and higher.
Okay. So there's another kind of
There's a
tier
break in
somewhere.
Which you can delegate to the county
Okay. Yeah.
management. I can't remember what that
Good.
is. I don't know if it fits with this, but there
Right.
is a break.
Well, I only bring that up insofar as if there are existing thresholds that the Drinking
Mhm.
Water Division
Yeah.
uses, explore those.
Yeah.
Because it could create some logical institutional, considerations.
Certainly.
Right. We have, Steve, over here. Yeah. We have been working and getting information from our drinking water colleagues, especially for the breakdown of proposed fees, as well as trying to think through these costs.
Yeah, great. It's a big open question. Mr. Bunkat from Alameda County Water District, followed by Brandy Hancox from the California-Nevada section of the AWWA.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Greg Buncab, and I am the environmental specialist representing the Alameda County Water District. We're a public water agency located in Fremont, California. First off, thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the statewide NPDES permit. The Alameda County Water District is very supportive of the state board's efforts in drafting a permit to cover drinking water discharges. We would like to commend Diana Messina and the staff on their efforts to collaborate with stakeholders and involve us in this process. We feel that the draft permit has potential to be a permit that is both practical and protective of the environment if certain revisions are made. We think it would be helpful if revisions to the draft permit based on today's comments and previous comments could be implemented and another draft released for a review by stakeholders. I want to give some quick comments on some of our concerns, my agency's concerns. Currently, the draft permit includes a numeric effluent limit of 10 NTU as a daily average for groundwater well discharges. This NEL is not practical for groundwater discharges and lacks sufficient rationale in the fact sheet. We propose that the state board sanction a discharge study to gather data that would help establish a practical turbidity numeric action level for the purposes of this permit. Furthermore, the information being asked for submittal in the site information section is very specific, particularly the location and general undetailed alignment of the receiving surface waters, identification of the portion of the community water system that discharges within a 300-foot conveyance distance from the receiving water and/or within a 300-foot radius of the receiving water. Without a definition of receiving water, agencies lack sufficient guidance as to what should be included in the site information. Furthermore, since this information is not readily available to water purveyors, it will take some time, money, and additional resources to fulfill this requirement with accurate and meaningful
Hey,
information.
can you help me? I'm just trying to understand that. If it's within 300 feet, it's not like it's distant.
Well,
So you must mean something about how you define
yes,
receiving
correct.
water.
That is
So-
correct. The permit currently does not have a definition of what a receiving water is, and I think clarity to that would be helpful for water purveyors.
So it'd be like if it goes into a storm drain.
Or flood control channels or canals or of that sort.
Oh, it's like the canal issue.
Similar,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So, for clarity, so your concern is that you don't know what a receiving water is?
Well, there's varying definitions out there, and the permit currently is a bit confusing as it refers to waters of the U.S., receiving waters, and are those interchangeably used, or?
Yes.
Okay. So clarification is needed regarding
Okay.
that issue. Finally, we do not agree with the inclusion of secondary MCLs as a running annual average as part of the discharge definitions and throughout the permit. Secondary MCLs address aesthetic concerns such as taste and odor and are
Right.
not health-based. This requirement will inhibit my agency's ability to discharge water from groundwater wells. We request that secondary MCLs be made, a wholesale change be made, and they be removed from the permit. Finally, again, thank you for this opportunity. ACWD looks forward to the continued collaboration with Diana and the State Board, and we would like to continue participation in crafting a practical and environmentally protective permit.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Interesting. All right. Brandy Hancox from the California-Nevada section of AWWA, followed by Ricky Russell from the California Coastkeeper Alliance.
Thank you, Chair Marcus and board members, for giving us the opportunity to speak today. My name is Brandy Hancox, and today I'm representing the California-Nevada section of the American Water Works Association. This is a volunteer organization. It's been around for about 90 years, and it represents 7,000 individual drinking water professionals. That includes people who work at utilities, that includes regulators, and government entities as well. We have a large and diverse membership. You've got people at one end of the scale that are large surface water wholesalers, and then very small systems with one or two sources of perhaps groundwater supply. In the process of gathering information on what our members felt about this particular permit, I had a lot of sympathy for Diana. A large portion of our membership strongly supports this particular permit, and a very large portion of it does not support the permit at all. So what I wanted to do today was to go over some of the areas of common concern that our membership has. The first one is that some of the permit language is a little bit confusing. Some people have already alluded to this, in particular the definitions. The definitions use terms that are commonly used in our industry, but kind of create new definitions for those. Those definitions are then linked to the effluent limits, making it sometimes difficult to determine which effluent limit applies to which type of discharge, and subsequently difficult then to determine what kind of costs might be associated with implementation of the permit. I understand that the monitoring program, they wanted to do flexibility to accommodate a lot of different types of utilities, but I think what that happens is sometimes it's a little bit confusing and also open to a lot of interpretation, which makes some people uncomfortable. They want a little bit more clarity on what is it that we should be monitoring for. The other issue that all of our members agreed on was the cost of compliance was of concern, and some of that's been mentioned here. I know we talked about the cost of handheld equipment, but I think on the end of the scale where you've got smaller utilities that do not have full-time staff, the requirement to monitor every single direct discharge would require the addition of actual labor manpower
Yeah,
hours.
where you have a really small one, there are only a couple of people that can't be everywhere at once. I
Correct.
just had this experience working with Indian tribes when I was at EPA, and the same person who did the paperwork had to climb on the tank and pour the stuff in on the top several times a day, et cetera. So I imagine a small system, you're gonna have a problem.
I mean, you do have the ability to put online analyzers onto these discharges, but, and those aren't very expensive, but the associated telemetry to actually
Is
record that data is very expensive. And not only that, you're talking about, you might have very remote sites that aren't linked to any kind of data collection system, and that might be very difficult to implement for those. So the recommendation for that is to move some of those direct discharges, which Diana already alluded to representative monitoring.
Right.
A lot of these discharges, we call them planned, but they're actually automated. They depend on system demand. There isn't someone there when they occur at all times. And they are very consistent, meaning they're very similar from discharge to discharge. So I think that would be appropriate for representative monitoring. The final area that a lot of members were concerned about was their ability to comply. Again, some of this has been mentioned. Everybody's made some really good comments today. In particular, with secondary MCLs, you may have some small systems that have only one or two sources of supply as a groundwater well that doesn't currently meet secondary MCLs. They would be constrained under this permit. They would be forced either to abandon those sources of supply and switch to perhaps more imported water, or they might have to seek an individual permit from the regional board. And I know that that increases manpower hours, not only of that utility, also the technical expertise to put together the application package in itself for some of these small utilities. So those are some of the overlapping concerns that a lot of the utilities had. And I appreciate the opportunity to comment, and we look forward to continuing to work with staff on developing this permit. So thank
Thanks a
you.
lot. Do you have a sense of what a reasonable size cutoff would be? Is it 100? Is it 500? Is it?
I've heard people mention 3,000.
That seems too big. That's just too big if you're talking about the impact. I'm thinking about the impact it can have and where you have some staff, but 15 sounds too small. I want to come up with a number
Maybe
that's
there's another-
just right. You can tell I have a grandchild, sorry.
Maybe there's a different way to get at it. I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, this is more like on a brainstorming type of thinking about it is there might be some of these small utilities that are very far and it's location dependent. They're nowhere near, and I have some of those in
Right.
my utility that aren't anywhere near anything that looks blue. It's brown everywhere. If it goes anywhere, it's going to percolate immediately. So maybe there's a way to create that exemption, and 3,000 might sound big, but maybe if it's 3,000 and no direct discharges, so you added another condition on there. I realize that tends to make things more
that's
complicated.
similar to there could be all kinds of things. So maybe it's a combination of size, potential impact, based on a number of factors.
Because the 3,000 might be big, but if you add that in there and they don't have direct discharges, I kind of heard some concerns about perhaps very small utilities like that might be right on a
Right.
recreational water body or something, and I can appreciate that, and maybe that's a way to find where that balance is at.
But
Thank
I live in Los Angeles, and so that's my frame of reference, and I've traveled all through Southern California in particular, and some of these small communities are the most in need of something like this. The larger communities can probably fend for themselves more than the small ones. The small ones really. I'm 15 does seem small to me, but I think people are being quite cavalier about these in between 3,000 and 15. Those folks are in huge need. They need training, they need help, they need, they may need to be under the tutelage of a larger system, eventually.
Working through AWWA, one of our primary functions is education of the professionals operating. We don't generally have an advocacy role.
Right.
And when I look at this, and being sort of the chair of the Environmental Compliance Committee for several years, looking at how do I reach out to the members and tell this, one thing Toby mentioned was the possibility of maybe phasing it a little bit. That would certainly give some relief and give the opportunity for some of the larger systems to implement the permit, figure it out, and then be able to communicate that information to smaller systems. I know that there's been phasing and other types of permits, so that's just, again, these are just kind of thoughts or brainstorming as to way to soften the blow and to bring some of those smaller systems into the fold is give them some time to see what the others are doing. Our association has conferences twice a year. That gives us an opportunity to have some of those larger utilities come there, present what they're working on, what they're doing, and for those small systems to get that education and to work as partners with the state board in doing that outreach to the small systems to help. So maybe there's a couple ways to get at this.
Right, and we'll be doing that on the more basic part of their work rather than discharges to receiving waters. We'll be focusing much more on their delivery of safe drinking water to people, which is their top priority.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Helpful. Ricky Russell with the California Coastkeeper Alliance, followed by Francois Rodigari from, I can't tell what water agency, investor-owned one.
Good afternoon,
Mr.
Madam
Russell.
Chair, members of the board. Ricky Russell, California Coastkeeper Alliance, a network of 12 waterkeeper groups from San Diego to the Oregon border who work daily to advocate for swimmable, fishable, and drinkable waters. As the current year has highlighted, California needs to closely examine every way in which it manages water and think creatively to adopt sustainable and resilient solutions to get us past this drought and the next. California Coastkeeper Alliance recognizes the board's work in this direction with the general NPDES permit for discharges from drinking water systems. However, in four broad categories, we believe more can be done. One, to ensure that no water is unreasonably used during these discharges. Two, that the threat of polluted runoff is minimized with clear monitoring requirements and enforceable standards. That three, beneficial reuse of discharged water is incentivized in the strongest manner possible. And importantly, four, that the necessary protections are in place to protect against any potential harmful impacts to aquatic species. The board can ensure against unreasonable use by making clear in the discharge permit that the discharge of drinking water into the state waterways when reuse and or multi-beneficial use is otherwise feasible constitutes waste and unreasonable use. We believe this is consistent with the California Constitution and Water Code Section 275. Second, we believe the board can minimize the threat of polluted runoff by ensuring monitoring plans are site-specific based upon the context of constituents present, beneficial uses, and the presence of aquatic species. Furthermore, monitoring locations should be required in places where sampling is representative of all pollutants actually being discharged into any receiving waters, and should test when applicable not only for constituents present in the discharge waterway, but any pollutants that the discharge might convey into receiving waters. As a third, the third broad category, with strong monitoring protocols and the inclusion of the most appropriate BMPs, the board can more strongly incentivize the beneficial reuse of discharged drinking water. To put a spin on things as far as the pushback you're receiving as far as cost of compliance, we see that as a beneficial way to incentivize and get water purveyors to think creatively how they can put their discharges to beneficial reuse and avoid the cost of compliance altogether. And most importantly, while the constituents present in the discharge of drinking water present little or no harm to human life, we are concerned about the potential impacts of discharges to aquatic species and ecosystems. We would like to see the discharge permit consider this more thoroughly and not allow a relaxation of standards that are already in place in other regions. To speak to, again, the issue of large systems versus small systems, we believe that a low threshold is the most appropriate because they will be the most likely, one, to discharge into receiving waters, but two, they seem, as to make a broad generalization, they seem in most instances the most flexible to actually put the water to a beneficial reuse. I see most 15 system connections being able to put the water they would discharge to a beneficial reuse, much more likely than a more than 3,000 connection system. So on behalf of California Coastkeeper Alliance, I thank you for your time and consideration, and we look forward to working with the board and staff to think creatively to stretch our water supply in ways that benefits all Californians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Francois Rodigari? I'm sorry.
That is correct. You pronounced it right, and I apologize about my handwriting.
No, I'm
Apparently
sorry.
It's San
Let me
Jose
just
Water
say
Company.
who's after you so
Okay.
people know. Kira Ross from the City of Pasadena Water and Power.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board, and thank you for this opportunity to comment on the draft permit. I want to say up front that we are in support of the permit, and we have been working with Diana Messina, and we have received really wonderful collaboration, and I think they understand the issues and are working with us very well. San Jose Water Company, for background, is an older utility. It was founded in 1866. It serves Silicon Valley with about 1 million consumers. And along with that long and proud history, we have an aging infrastructure and some facilities that were designed over a century ago in some cases. And clearly at the time, some of the concerns we are talking about today were probably not on the forefront of the engineers and the people that built the system. That matters because one of the issues is well water. We have a diverse portfolio in Santa Clara Valley. We purchase 50% of our water from the Santa Clara Water District, which is surface water that is treated by them. We produce 40% of our water from wells, and then we treat 10% of surface water that comes from our watersheds in the Santa Cruz Mountain. So groundwater is of very high interest to us. It's particularly during drought. It actually is providing now more than 40%. And some of our wells, we have 30-some well sites. They are in the middle of Silicon Valley, surrounded by homes, very small site in some cases. And we are very concerned about our ability to bring those wells into service when we need them to meet demand or changes in the distribution system. The 10 NTU standard is of concern to us, even on a daily average, because we have currently those wells were built next to rivers, typically Guadalupe rivers or others, and they are direct discharges. There is no effective way to treat that water currently. Ms. Messina showed some Baker tanks. Some of those Baker tanks would not fit on those well sites. You could not bring them there. And in any case, with 30 well sites, it would be a very time-consuming and costly compliance issues. So we are certainly willing to explore solutions, but we're concerned that if the permit were adopted in the next few months, we could not necessarily comply and may not be able to use some of our wells. So I just wanted to point that out. I also wanted to emphasize Adam Valukiewicz's point about some synergies of using data from the Division of Drinking Water, since now it should be more accessible to Division of Water Quality. Particularly pH. pH is monitored routinely as part of your compliance. It's typically invariant. It varies very, very little over time, maybe seasonally. It's typically within the range that you would find desirable for discharges to surface water, 6.5 to 8.5. However, having said that, some large utilities, for corrosion control or because of their water has very low alkalinity, have fairly high pH above 9 and so forth. Having said that, even if we monitor the pH, which we are concerned about, because pH, while it can be done in the field, to yield accurate number typically is a laboratory analysis. NPDES compliance for pH analysis is typically not done in the field. The instrument require calibration check, and typically it's a lab technician that would do this work rather than essentially an operations person who is typically a plumber. So having bad numbers in the field would not do anybody any good. And even if we documented the pH to be above 8.5, let's say, which we already know a priori, there's nothing we could do about it because we were not going to be trucking acids or base in the field to try to neutralize the pH. So that typically that's not done. So I just wanted to point out to you, we can certainly report on an annual basis what our pH in the distribution system is, the ranges and so forth, and provided that we don't do chemical alterations as part of our discharges, that pH will be what it is. So the other item is I wanted to emphasize that the California Code of Regulation already recognizes potable water discharges as de minimis discharges and low threat discharges. That is certainly in the current fee structure for NPDES permit. I think we want to make sure that people look at that in perspective, and the permit, I think, is a wonderful opportunity to make sure that BMPs are applied, that dechlorination is done consistently, that sediments are removed, and we are completely in support of that. But it should not turn into the typical NPDES permit, which would be like for a wastewater effluent single point. So this is a different animal. We are in the business of providing safe drinking water, and we only discharge water when we have to. Trust me, water is valuable, and so we have no reason to throw it away unless we are trying to protect the public. I also wanted to point out something that is not currently covered in the permit, and that is the relationship with the MS4 operators. A utility like ours, San Jose Water Company, does not own a stormwater system, a conveyance system. So oftentimes we will discharge to an MS4 system, but there is no obligation from the MS4 operator to take our water. And in fact, in case of recent Supreme Court decision, there is still in question whether or not the MS4 operator could be liable for the discharges brought into the system that are not theirs. And currently, I believe that is the case. So theoretically, we could have an NPDES permit, but no ability to discharge if the MS4 operator refused us.
Do you think that's likely? I don't think that's likely. It might be theoretically possible, but I'd dare an MS4 operator to tell a drinking water system they can't flush their line.
Well, that is actually happening right
Really?
now. I can only speak for San Jose Water Company. One of the municipalities we operate in currently is prohibiting us from doing any discharge other than obviously unplanned, because we have no control over that. But we are not doing flushing, we're not doing anything. And their concern is about making sure that our discharges are properly regulated and monitored, and they are concerned about the liability. So I will not speak for the MS4 operator, but I do believe
Thank you for flagging that.
if the permit somehow or the board could adopt some language or policy giving some safeguard to the MS4 operator, providing that we do our work properly, that we can discharge to their system. I don't know to what extent you can do this. I've talked to Ms. Messina about it, but I think that would be something that needs to be thought about. And in conclusion, I want to thank you, and I want to say that obviously we have far more detailed comments that will be forthcoming through Aqua, CWA, and others. I just wanted to give you some highlights, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I gave you extra time also because you sounded so cool. Sorry. I'm sorry.
I don't think I sound nearly as cool, but
I'm
thank
sorry,
you.
Kara, I'm putting like a real burden on you here.
Yeah, being I think the last speaker of the day. Thank you, Chair Marcus and the board, for the opportunity to comment. I'm Kira Ross on behalf of the City of Pasadena Water and Power Municipal Utility. And while we think there is great value and we are heavily supportive of the Clean Water Act and Port of Cologne to ensure that our source waters remain safe, we have a number of concerns with the existing draft permit, and we will be submitting very detailed comments, but wanted to highlight a few today. The first main concern we had was that the only real problem that we see is associated with discharges from community water systems is chlorine, and we would note that all of the existing NPDES permits would require that that water is dechlorinated today. And so we question a little bit, well, we think that the proposed permit would not change the MS4 permits so that, and it provides no additional protection to the aquatic life. And so we see some duplication and kind of question why.
Well, you don't need it if it's under the MS4.
Right, but we're.
Unless you want it.
Unless we want it, but we view this as why necessarily then add any additional work? So we would rather, we just don't think it provides any additional help today.
All right. Some people do, but okay.
They may. And we also would note that staff have indicated that they are concerned about providing regulatory coverage to community water systems in the form of an NPDES permit. We would note that 8 of 9 regions already have existing NPDES permits and that already cover low threat discharges, and the only region is Region 2. And we question on that note why the state is pushing a statewide permit that we believe is really, there are some individual issues or some regional issues, but we don't believe that there's a need for a statewide permit to address everyone, when there may be more localized issues that could be addressed. It may be at not the level of the statewide permit. We'd also note that the board staff have indicated that they want to achieve efficiency by having only one board working on a permit for community water systems rather than having each regional board. However, we believe this is less efficient as the regional permits are already written, and thus the draft permit is redundant of the regional efforts. And again, this sort of gets to the other point. We believe that if there are issues regionally that need to be addressed, okay, address them, but we don't necessarily believe that you need a statewide permit to do this, nor would that necessarily be the most effective way, in our opinion. Board staff have further indicated that they want to achieve a uniform regulatory environment for community water systems. However, the draft is not, we don't believe, achieves that objective. The permit creates numerous exceptions for community water systems so that a significant number will not be enrolled, and they will still need to comply with MS4 permits, which have different requirements than the permit. Again, we're still getting to this issue of, we believe that there's duplicity within the draft.
That would be duplicative.
Duplicative, yes.
No duplicity. Just defending you, Diana.
Yes. Thank you. And finally, we would also echo the cost concerns and just don't necessarily believe this is the right timing given the statewide drought and other issues that are facing communities today. We think maybe another time we could look at these issues, but not at this point, and because of that, would oppose the permit.
Thank you.
So I just have to mention that not all of those permits that are in the regions cover these discharges. And so there are discharges to water systems
It
for
varies,
different
right.
things, but they don't cover all of these issues. And so the
There are some people who need this permit
Yes.
very, very much across
I
the
just want to
state.
make sure you understand.
Right. But Pasadena may not, so they wouldn't know that.
But Pasadena's representing a much larger group, the community water systems, and they've been opposing this work for a long time.
Really? Are you speaking on behalf of all the community water systems? I didn't think, just Pasadena today.
It is, she's right. It's part of a much broader group.
All right. That's like what? Right. Great. Any questions? So thank you for, I know that that's a narrowed down set of lists from where we were early on. I appreciate the appreciation of staff for all the workshops that they did, and I also appreciate that your comments will come in with far more detail, but it is really helpful to hear from you in these short, focused arena because it guides us in the list of things to think about, and it helps winnow down the issues that need to be resolved. I also very much heard some folks wanted us to change the schedule before hearing from you. I think it's more prudent to see. We see what we get in the comments and the conversation, and then we'll figure out a schedule that works to allow us to move forward, yet illuminate the issues adequately. We're trying very much, I know it's sort of exhausting, but we're trying to not never get anything done. Is that a double negative or whatever? If anything, I want this board to be seen as a board of action and yet compassion and listening and thoughtfulness. And so we're not just dragging things on to put it off on a shelf, as you heard if you were here earlier this morning, our concern with delaying a different issue that was on our agenda. So we're trying to move, make decisions, and I think most managers appreciate that. So we'll figure out whether we need more time and whether that's prudent once we see what we get.
Yeah. I really appreciate everyone's attention to this issue. You know, a couple decades ago, I used to be a staff member at the Regional Water Board, and I would handle these things case by case by getting an executive officer letter. It was incredibly inefficient. There have been strides made in different regions, you know, in terms of getting toward this, but it's great to hear everybody's input, and it reinforces to me the importance of the state board to step up and create efficiencies in a consistent way statewide. And this is a perfect example of a program where we can do that. And I know Tam Dodek's not here today, but she and I share this opinion that this is something, a great example of what the State Water Board should do. And I want to thank staff for their leadership and acknowledge a significant amount of effort that's happened at the regional level, even this year, in terms of different regional boards trying to grapple with standardizing this program. You know, we recognize, we want to make sure we hit it with the right touch, not too heavy, but not so light that problems arise that were preventable. I support the idea of a low threat approach, you know, and yet I think we've been honest about what threats do exist. And then just thank staff also for tying in the multiple benefit vision. You know, these are just drops of water in the big scheme, but now more than ever we know how important all the drops are. And so, you know, there's this incentive that we create by recognizing low impact development in our landscape, that takes away those qualities of the drinking water that can harm the aquatic ecosystem. It creates that buffer. So it's yet another reason for us to, you know, just keep on redefining our landscape and how water moves across it. The drinking water discharges are yet another example of how that revisioning of the California landscape has multiple benefits. So thanks for recognizing that. And, you know, of course, thank you for working with people and so closely on a quick time scale this year, being responsive to the regional board interests. And I just want to reaffirm that commitment that we really value the input we've received, because we want this to be a very operational, efficient program. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Ditto.
Great. Well, thank you all. That's very helpful. Appreciate it. Thank you to those of you who were here all day. A few of you were.
So would you like me to do the executive office?
That's not on here. You're so funny. Is there anything else? Have I forgotten anything else? Okay, we will reconvene. We'll reconvene tomorrow for the workshop on DSUP.
I could